Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Window Chats with Robyn, the podcast where I sit by my window and chat with very interesting people. Today's guest is Kacer. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Robyn. It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
It's such a pleasure to chat with you too. And it's such hard subject matter that we're going to cover today, but I'm just really grateful for your time and for being willing to approach this subject matter, such as the Holocaust. So if there's anyone that's not comfortable with this subject matter, a bit of a warning here. This this is some sensitive material. I will not be offended if you don't watch it, but you should because it's important to know about the Holocaust. Those are my thoughts. But again, everyone will do what they want to do with their comfort level. It's really interesting. I remember I went on the March of the Living as a child when I was a teenager, and as uncomfortable as I knew I would be visiting concentration camps, going to Poland, seeing where, millions of Jews were killed, I felt like I had to do it. And, like as much as certain material is uncomfortable and I don't want to revisit it, I feel like a huge part of me needs to, like a huge part of my grandmother was a survivor. There's a bunch of survivors in my family, extended and whatnot. And I just felt like the least I could do was at least get a sense of what it was like. And I believe you went to the March of the Living as well. And I felt, I don't know what your experience was, but I felt it was so odd going to concentration camps like Auschwitz, whatnot, and just seeing grass growing and houses around the concentration camps and like eating a sandwich there. And I go, this is such a weird vibe of this was death. And now we're here. And I don't know. I'd love to know your experience if you're comfortable sharing.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, and I went on March of the Living as an adult. I didn't go as a teenager, and really believed that finally I needed to connect in that kind of physical way with that history as a child of survivors, a grandchild of survivors. And it is a bit, these are now museums in a way, I guess. So it is a bit strange to see the grass growing and really only begin to imagine what it must have been like at that time. But I always say, when we talk about this history and why it's important and why your audiences need to hear about it, as uncomfortable as it might be, I always say, and I think about it even in my writing, that it is okay for kids to be moved by this history, for any of us to be moved by this history. It's okay for us to be saddened by this history. This is a sad history. What I don't want, what we don't want, is for anyone to be traumatized by this history. So I think, I always tread that fine and careful line around engaging my audiences, making sure that I'm telling the truth about this history, but not terrifying them. And that was my experience when I was on March of the Living. I was sad a lot of the time, but we should be sad.
Yes.
There's nothing to rejoice when we talk about the truth of that history. So sadness is good. Feeling sadness is what we ought to be feeling when we're in those places.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's interesting too, though, because there are stories that I hear that give me hope, right? Because and I think you touched on this as well, there were a lot of non-Jews that helped Jews and hid them or gave figured out ways to help them, even though they could also be punished and killed and their whole family could be killed. So there are these stories of bravery and heroism that I do find hope in. Knowing that, but what the thing is, a lot of this that I've reflected on since a teenager and as an adult, but I don't know what I would do in that situation. I think as a teenager, it was so easy for me to judge and say, how dare you not help my fellow Jew and do this to my grandparents and my extended family that I'll never, ever get to see. But I think it is so hard to judge and know what I would actually do in that situation.
Yeah, of course. None of us know what we would be able to do when faced with those kinds of choices. And the truth is, there were not enough people who helped. had
Yeah.
more helped, the outcome of this time in history could have been dramatically different. And yes, I think that's why it's so important to celebrate those individuals, not enough of them, but as many as there are, celebrate those individuals who were willing to, demonstrate that kind of good citizenship and moral courage at that dangerous time in history. The dangers to them were great. And so for those who, stood out and rose above the crowd and helped their fellow neighbors and friends who were Jewish, they are role models for each and every one of us. And I will say, I write a lot about rescuers because I think it is so important, particularly in this day and age with rising anti-Semitism in the world. Let's look to those people who helped Jews at that time. And I will say that, my stories, and again, because I write for primarily a young audience, even though I am writing about this difficult time in history, my stories are all quite hopeful. I am wanting to kids to understand the difficulty of the past, but also to celebrate the fact that people survived and there were courageous people who helped them, and so that's a big part of the writing that I do.
It's definitely easier to digest as a child, for sure.
Yeah, no question. I mean, as we've said, this is a difficult history. So how do we make it accessible to young people without terrifying them, without turning them away? I mean, I want kids to read one of my books or any of the books that are there for young readers. And I want them to want to read another book and eventually, become those independent readers and learners of this history. Perhaps like you, go on March of the Living, or if they're not Jewish, go on some of the groups that go to Poland and really look at what happened there in the past, and go to Germany and go to those countries where the concentration camps were. So yeah, I'm constantly thinking about how to get young people interested in reading about this history. And so I keep producing books that hopefully will interest them.
I find it very interesting. I don't think it matters the age. I love seeing the angles that you approach. But I also, and I spoke to you about this before, I love the teacher's guide or the learning guide, whatnot. And I love the questions that it's a no judgment. It's literally to gauge where people are at. And I think it's really important when someone's learning about a subject matter they've never heard about, is to come from a place of this isn't judgment. What do you need to learn? What is your bias, in a sense?
Yeah. And really, a lot of those teachers' guides are also, obviously, they're tools for educators, because educators struggle with how to bring this material to their students. And especially in the public schools. I mean, Jewish kids to some extent will get this history one way or another.
Yeah.
But my wish, my goal is always to reach out to the, just to the regular elementary schools, the Catholic schools, any schools that are willing and able to look at this history. And they need that support through teachers' guides or through, I speak to kids all over the place. So, or bringing a survivor into the classroom while we still have survivors who are able and willing to talk about their history. So all of those resources are really there to help the system continue to talk about this history and continue to make it relevant.
Absolutely. Exactly. The relevancy. And as the number of Holocaust survivors are dwindling, just a panic is setting inside of me, because already we have people denying the Holocaust happened, which, if you know, the word of the year is gaslighting. Okay. This is just ridiculous to tell us that this didn't happen, with people just tattooed numbers and killed off their family, and what their house was ransacked for no reason. Just your complete loss of identity. And let's just say that never happened. I don't know. I think it's inexcusable. I think I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty shocking, Robyn. I can't believe we are in this time and place where there are people who are denying the truth of that history. And again, all the more reason for me to keep writing, for all of us to keep speaking about it. When I go into a classroom and I think when I'm speaking to kids, and there are, I don't know what, 50, 100 kids in front of me. And I don't believe I'm going to influence all 100 of them, but I always think, if I influence 5, maybe 10, if I'm really lucky, if I influence 10 to want to learn and read more, and they might influence 10 or 20. And I think that's the best we can do to keep spreading this word, and just knowing that everyone that we influence, it's paying it forward. Everyone that we influence will influence some down the road as well. And really, that is the best we can do.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, it's keeping the stories alive. And it's also, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this year, I think in grade 6, there's like 1 day of Holocaust education. That's
So,
now mandated, or did I completely misunderstand that?
well, almost.
Okay.
So up until now, Holocaust has only been mandatory starting in grade 10, believe it or not. So
Okay. Did not know that.
teachers who spoke about it or brought literature or survivors into their classroom before that were doing it just because they felt it was necessary, and they did it through English literature or history or geography or whatever. Recently, the Ontario government has now mandated that Holocaust education must begin in grade 6. So we're at this point where, the boards of education and the educators are sort of coming together now to say, fantastic, let's start it in grade 6. I think that's really appropriate. How do we do that? What is relevant for kids in grade 6? What can they learn? What should we not be bringing to them? So, I'm about to be part of a couple of committees that will be looking at curriculum, along with a lot of people who know more about curriculum than I do, and really trying to define what the Holocaust curriculum can look like beginning in grade 6. But it's such an important step, and I really applaud the government for bringing it to the grade 6 classroom in this way.
For sure. Because what is grade 6? How old are you? 12? 11, 12?
Yeah,
Okay, 12. All right. Like, is that bat mitzvah age? I think so.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
absolutely. Bar
Yeah.
bat mitzvah age, and that in grade 7, sort of around there. And certainly my books. I mean, I have kids as young as 9 and 10 who are reading my books as an introduction to this history. Some of them, not all of them. So that grade 6, perfect age to be learning this history in a more earnest kind of way.
Absolutely. I think it's really smart the way you approach this subject matter of I know the things that I read as a child are what resonate. Like I still remember them, and it kind of helped shape who I was as a person. I think you're introduced to thoughts at a younger age, and it opens your minds to things earlier on, which I think is very important.
So, it's so interesting because my parents spoke very openly about their survival stories. I don't know if that was true of your grandparents, but certainly my parents were talkers. And I grew up in this family of talkers and this community of survivors and talkers. So the stories that I learned, I mean, the only book available to me when I was a child was The Diary of Anne Frank. There were no people really writing about this history for my age group.
Right.
So my education in the Holocaust was really formed at the knee of my parents as I listened to them and their friends talk about their stories. And I was that kid who sat there and asked a million questions and wanted to hear more and more. And I always say that my parents must have had some kind of innate sensitivity about how much to tell me at each stage of my development, so that I was not terrified when I was growing up hearing this history, but I was, passionate about it and curious about it. And that's really where my determination to begin writing the stories came from, really from their willingness to talk and their ability to talk about it in a way that really engaged me.
It must be so hard because I know people think of someone that survives a severely traumatic event. And this isn't just like an event, it's years, right? You can be in a concentration camp for years fighting for your life. I completely understand people that are not comfortable talking about it. They want to move on. But again, the fact that your parents are brave enough to share their story and educate future generations, I think it's it's commendable. It really is.
Yeah, it really was a privilege because you're right. There are survivors who have not been able to talk about this history, and I respect that completely. There were members in my family who were not able to talk about this history either. So, there were my parents on the one hand who shared so openly, and there were others on the other hand who just could not bring themselves to talk about it. So, completely understandable. Yes, the traumatic effect of this is different for every single individual. There is no one size fits all for dealing with talking about this history. So, the fact that my parents were able and willing was really a privilege for me.
Definitely. But I mean, you look at what you did, right? You took that and you are inspiring the next generation and sharing their stories and keeping this discussion alive. This is it's so important, and it's so funny when I was trying to put this together, and I thought, okay, I have to share stories about the Holocaust. And, I ran into Gabi and she said, reach out to my mom. And it's so, I don't even know where to begin, who to reach out to. And I was so surprised by my number of friends that are not directly affected by the Holocaust. Because I guess going to Jewish school or elementary school and high school, I just thought everyone is somehow directly affected. And that's not the case. And to me, it was kind of a moment of, well, what do I do as a granddaughter of a survivor? How can I pay it forward in a sense? Because if they had the bravery to survive and I don't know, I just feel so obligated to somehow keep their memory alive. And I don't know if this is going to be it, but I appreciate these stories and your time and what you're doing. I really do.
Listen, thank goodness you're doing this because, no, seriously, I will say that. Thank goodness you're doing this because having me on or just talking about your history or being proud of your Judaism or proud of the fact that you're the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, that is important. That keeps this, this history on the forefront. And the survivors, as we've said, sadly are aging and passing away. I'm writing a bunch of books, but that'll stop at some point. So eventually it will be you and your generation who are left with the task. And I want to say the responsibility to tell these stories is not a Jewish responsibility. This is a human responsibility to know this history and tell these stories. I mean, the Holocaust was the worst genocide in history. So and sadly, there have been too many other genocides. But we need to know this one. We really need to know this one as we learn about others and understand other genocides as well. And that's everybody's responsibility. That's why bringing the Holocaust into grade 6 curriculum is so important, because it is a starting off point for learning about history. And that's why I go into schools that are not Jewish schools to talk about this, because I want those kids to understand this history. And I speak to educators and parents about it because I want them to understand this history. So, human responsibility is what we're talking about.
I really like that way you phrased it, the human responsibility. It's true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so whatever we can do it, and we do it in our own way. You do it through a podcast like this. I do it through writing. Others do it through literature or plays or music or whatever that is. Any way, or survivors themselves, any way that we can continue to talk about this history is really important.
For sure. I think I read that you wrote a play with Jake. Is that correct?
I did. With my son Jake. So Jake is a beautiful writer as well as a wonderful actor, and
he's okay. Whatever. No.
Yeah, whatever. So he and I had been. This was some years ago. He and I had been talking about finding a project that we could do together, and really, it was just talk at the time. And then this incredible story came to me. Somebody actually called me and said, I heard this story about a man who had survived the Holocaust, thinking that his first wife had been killed in the death camps. He moved to North America, remarried, and some years later, his first wife suddenly appeared. She had, in fact, survived. And I heard that, and I had heard little bits of other stories like that. There are, in fact, other stories like that. This is the first time that somebody actually knew someone who had experienced it, and there was a personal connection. So, and this person who called me said, you might want to think about writing a book about it. And I immediately thought, wow, that could make a really interesting play. And maybe that's the project that Jake and I could work on together. And so I approached him, and he was keen to do it. And that's how our, that writing partnership kind of started. We started writing this play with no idea of what was going to happen to it or where it was going to go. We finished it in a summer. We were both kind of in between. Jake was in between gigs, and I was in between books. And we wrote outdoors, we wrote in the kitchen, we wrote here in my office, we wrote everywhere. Finished it in a summer, the first draft, and took it to the Harold Green Jewish Theatre here in Toronto. And it took a while after some readings and workshopping it and, oh my gosh, changing every word in it, that they finally agreed to do it. And so we premiered the play, which we call Therefore Choose Life. In, I think it was 2017 when it opened at the Harold Green Theatre. And, the opportunity to work with my kid on a project was first and foremost the most rewarding part of that. Whatever happened to the play was kind of secondary just to the opportunity to work with Jake on it. But the fact that it did actually become a play that people came to see, and it was thankfully it was quite successful at Harold Green, and Jake was in it, and
that's classic nepotism right there. Unbelievable.
You write your own work, right? You create your
as he's creating his own content. He is a struggling actor. That's what everyone would say about Jake Epstein. So
anyway, it was fantastic. One of the most memorable creative times of my life. Jake was it's so funny, Jake was living in New York at the time, living and working in New York.
Oh, was that the Spider-Man days or?
The Spider-Man days. And it may have even been when he was from Spider-Man, he went into a musical in New York called Beautiful, the Carole King musical. Oh. I think it was more during that time. So I would periodically fly down to New York, and we would have these like crazy writing sessions in his teeny tiny apartment. Where we would just, go back and forth with ideas and lines and scenes and just, churned it out, the revisions and the rewriting. And it was wonderful. It was really a wonderful experience.
Your whole family, you guys are so creative. And I know even I was listening to Gabi do some of your audiobooks. I was listening to that, I think, on Audible. And I love you're just like, let's work through all the children. Shout out to Gabi Epstein. But you involve them in the Holocaust as well, right? So, you write a play with Jay, Gabi's reading the audiobook. I think it's incredible.
So I have, interestingly enough, I have very little to do with the fact that Gabi has done these audiobooks of several of my books now. That audiobooks is one form of acting creativity, and she has auditioned for audiobooks in the past, and then got one of them, which happened to be mine, and from there has gone on to be the reader for a half a dozen of my books, along with other books as well. So
you made your daughter audition. I'm just backtracking on that. Okay, that's good to know. All right, no nepotism there. Okay,
I totally told her she's got to. When I knew that the audiobook was being done, why not go for it? So, of course, first of all, my kids grew up with this history, so there was no getting away from it. They read my first books when they themselves were in elementary school. So, my first book, The Secret of Gabi's Dresser, my mother was Gabi. My Gabi is named after her. So they are intertwined with this history and their history, my history, from the get-go. And so nothing gives me more pride than the fact that, Gabi now reads the audiobooks of my Holocaust books. That's so important to me. Or that Jake and I wrote a play, or that, Jake hosted an event at Holocaust Education Week and has hosted other Holocaust Education Week events. So I know that they've kind of, taken up the baton of this history as well, and will continue to talk about it and promote it going forward.
I know there's a lot of, there's a bunch of Jewish actors, but I really do appreciate that Jake and Gabi are, again, like you said, you're passing the baton on to them because, I mean, life is so busy and there are so many projects and opportunities, but to know that you're making this a priority, I think it's so necessary, even if you don't have a connection to the Holocaust, just to at least fit it in. I don't know how to phrase it, but just make it part of your life because it is a part of, I know it's definitely a part of my life. I wouldn't be here if not for my grandmother's will to survive. So, yeah.
Right. And listen, it now for me, it is so much about the next generation.
Absolutely.
I did a book a few years ago called To Look a Nazi in the Eye. And I did it with this fabulous young woman whose name is Jordana Leibowitz. Jordana was 19 years old when she really became incredibly interested in Holocaust history, and she ended up traveling to Germany to sit in on the trial of a Nazi war criminal. That's what the book is about. It's her journey to be a part of this trial, and really to become a spokesperson for this history for her generation, which is exactly what she's doing. She's formed this nonprofit organization that takes a replica of a Holocaust cattle car from university campus to university campus. And she's created a whole exhibit, her and a team, inside of this cattle car so that young people can entering into this history to some extent and experience some of it in this visual kind of way. So she's another example of the next generation taking up the baton and doing their part, what they're able and interested in doing to make sure that the history stays alive. That just fills my heart with so much delight and relief, I guess, that, there will be young people who will continue to learn and hear and read and do and all that kind of stuff. That's really what it's all about.
I think, like, when you talk about the cattle car, and no matter how many times I watch a movie about the Holocaust or I see a cattle car, I can't even fathom what those conditions were. To just be placed in a car, you don't know where you're going, there's no food or water, you're literally sharing a bucket to relieve yourself in. People are literally dying all around you. It's just, I mean, and like, okay, you have the cattle car, but oh my gosh, and people are crying and yelling and no one's listening, and oh my gosh, just the cattle car alone, that experience, I don't know how they did it.
It is remarkable that, people like my parents came out sane at the end of that experience. It's understandable why people were so traumatized and now unable to talk about it. But it is, I think, even more remarkable that some came out sane and willing to live a life that had been taken away from them during that time, and finding joy and love and families again after having lost all of that during that time. It is truly remarkable that anyone was able to do that. I don't know if I would have had that strength. I mean, none of us know what we would do if God forbid we were put to that test. But there is so much to be admired in these individuals. When we say survivor, we say it with every ounce of what that means and what that implies.
I keep saying absolutely because I don't know how to add on to your sentence, but that's fundamentally yes. But it's so, like, every part of the Holocaust, even when you're talking about the play you wrote with Jake and how people literally didn't know if their relatives were alive after, because families were separated, they were all over the world, and I think there was radios that would call out names, or how did it work? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, when survivors were looking for their loved
ones. When they were looking for family.
Right, and there were, often there were boards or, notes that were left on what was left of synagogues or public buildings that would let people know that they were alive or they were in this place or that place. Who knew where their family members were? A relative of mine who I've never met actually, but years ago decided to do a family tree of my mother's side of the family and ended up creating this incredible document with, dating back 4 or 5 generations with a great-great-great-grandfather and his 12 children, and each one of them had lines of children, and I'm sort of one of the branches of this tree. And so I have it in this book that he sent to me and to all of our family members that he could get hold of. And when you go through the book, there's my parents and me and my siblings and my children, my grandmother, we're documented. But there are entire branches of this tree where all it says is killed in Auschwitz, killed in Auschwitz, killed in Auschwitz. So those branches were completely cut off and all of those family members were lost. So what enabled my family to survive and this branch to be murdered? There's no real answer to that. There's no real answer as to why my family managed to survive and someone else didn't. I often ask survivors what it took for them to survive. It's one of the questions I often ask. And I often ask kids when I'm speaking to them, what do you think it took for someone to survive? And kids come up with these wonderful answers. They say you had to be brave to survive, or you had to be strong to survive, or you had to be healthy. Some say you had to be rich. There are some people who say you had to have faith in order to survive, like all of these wonderful answers. And I think that was any one of those was probably true for many of the people who survived. But I also have to believe that among those who were killed, among those who perished, there were many, or even most, who were strong, healthy, wealthy, had faith, all of those strong things, and yet they didn't survive. So often if I ask survivors what they think the answer is to that question, they will simply say it all boiled down to luck. They had this, but at the end of the day, it was just being in the right place at the right time, and nobody knew what that place might be, but having the luck to be there at that time and be able to survive.
Luck is such a huge component. It's true. No one knows what's going on, when it's going to end, what's happened. My grandmother had a best friend that they got through the camp together. And when I remember my mom would tell me she spoke to her best friend and she said, like, her best friend said, I'm only alive because of your mom. And then my grandmother would say, I'm only alive because of the best friend. So you kind of have that support system there.
So I will say that, the other part of that, and I bring it back to why I write about so many rescuers, someone willing to help was the other component that not all, but many survivors turn to as so important in their lives. They, like your family story, they would not have survived had they not had somebody who was there willing to support them, help them, whether it was in the camp or outside of the camp or before getting to the camp or in the ghetto or wherever it was that they were. Somebody who was willing to help was such an important component to their survival.
And I know I only have you for the hour, and it's just trying to describe what the Holocaust, there's so many different aspects to it. There was people that were in a ghetto. There were people that were in a camp. There were people that were hiding. There's no experience is the same. And and that's why, again, coming back to education and learning, we can't get into this in the hour. Okay, the Holocaust is done. Here you go. That's all you need to watch. But yeah.
But it is true that, when we talk about the Holocaust, wrongly, there are some people who just think that it is about the death camps. That's the Holocaust. When in fact, we know that what became the Holocaust began so many years before that. I mean, you could almost say that it began with the election of Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany in 1933. That was 6 years before the start of the Second World War. But that set off all the elements of discrimination and laws to limit the freedom of Jewish people and that kind of oppression that led to more laws and more restrictions. And then we get to the ghettos, and then we get to the concentration camps, and so on. So yes, the study of this history, and it is broad. It's not just one thing. And the experiences of this history are so vast and varied. And each one of them at each time in that timeline is really important to understanding the whole history.
Mm-hmm. You're right, because it just didn't happen overnight. You wake up and next thing you know, all the Jews are in a concentration camp. It's this hatred over time and these laws, and even something basic like Jews would have to wear a yellow star. And didn't they have to make it themselves and put it on and then face all this discrimination?
Correct.
And trying to explain that to people, like, no, they literally had to sew it on, and then people would just not sell to them or spit on them or beat them up and kill them in the street. And that was acceptable.
So, the two kind of fallacies that I deal with young people who are still struggling to understand what this history is. Listen, I struggle.
Oh, of course.
With history. So fair enough. But two things that they think. One is that the Holocaust is just the death camps. Not true. It is such a broad discussion. The second thing that kids will often say is that Adolf Hitler killed 6 million people. Well, one person could never be responsible for the death of 6 million people. Yes, engineered a machine that was responsible, but he also had a lot of allies and friends and people who were willing to come on board and were willing to support that ideology. And, you don't kill 6 million on your own. You have help.
But that's why it's so scary when I see someone like Kanye spout the hatred. And you go, okay, that's one person, but he has like 18 million followers. And anything that he says, he has more followers than there are Jews in the world. I've seen this fact and it terrifies me.
Yes, I know.
One person at the top is saying this, a bunch of people are agreeing, and what ensues from his thoughts is terrifying. And
Right.
That's why, someone that is in a position of power, whether it be because they make music and everyone loves them or just a government official, whatnot, anyone that is in a position of power has to be very careful with their wording, because then you'll encourage people and make them feel like it's okay to hate Jews and then you take the hatred to the next level and the next level. And next thing you know, God forbid, history starts repeating itself. It's a very scary thought.
Yeah, no, it is a scary thought. I'm just heartsick when I think about people like Kanye and what he's able to spew out and how many millions and millions of people are following him and probably agreeing with what he has to say. Just heartsick about it. But again, I'll come back to what can I do? What can we do? Yeah. We do what we do. We do we play the part that we play in talking about the history, keeping it alive, disputing all those lies that are out there, disputing those who deny, challenging anti-Semitism. All of those things are what each and every one of us can do. I'll say it again, not just Jews, but everyone needs to take a part in being responsible for this history.
We talk about allies, right? And especially like LGBTQ community, right? And whatnot. And I do think there should be Jewish allies, because there's not that there. You killed a lot of us. So we need allies and people to, or even, honestly, just take the time to learn. And I think there's a lot of people right now that just have an opinion, whether it be because that's what they were taught or someone that they admire said this, and so they just take it as fact. And I think if you're willing to learn and then form an opinion, that's totally your choice. Freedom of expression, whatnot, or freedom of thought. But I don't think people are taking the time to learn, and because it's hard. Right. Although nowadays it's a Google search, but I think it's just really important to not just do what other people say and have those thoughts, but to form your own opinion.
And listen, I do believe we do have allies. I do believe there are a lot of people out there who support the Jewish community and who are willing to challenge all of that hatred and anti-Semitism. And the fact that I have, I've written 30 books about this time in history for mostly young readers, and I continue to have publishers who are wanting and willing to publish my books. So that says something to me as well. That means that this literature is still wanted by young people, by families, by teachers, by parents, by kids themselves. and that and and I'm published around the world, so it's not just in
I
Canada.
saw that. I know. I'm like, look at these other languages. That's very interesting.
I have a collection on one of my shelves back there of all of my books in different languages, and it's always so interesting, fascinating to see what the cover looks like. First of all, what the title has become in a different language, and
Right.
just the whole look
Yeah,
of
how
it.
it translates, of course. Yeah.
And
That's
whether or not I mean, I have nothing to do with the translation of my books. And in all honesty, Robyn, I have no idea what they read like in whatever language that
I
they're.
get it. Yeah. I know I'm trying to learn a bunch of different languages now. One of them being Romanian, and the English versus Romanian it's not perfect. You know, when you try and take something Romanian and make it English, you go, oh, no, doesn't work. So I can see that would be, that would just be for fun comedy.
I
Thinking,
know. Japanese. I have, I'm published in
what?
Japan.
Oh, that's so, okay. I thought I saw, I can't remember which, I thought it was Ukraine, but I don't think that's correct. What was the,
Not published in
not,
Ukraine.
not Polish, maybe, I don't know. I don't know what the language was. You went on a tour somewhere and it was a different language. I was creeping you on Facebook. Now you know.
I mean, I have been on tour to Germany and to Australia and to Brazil. Oh, that was an interesting. My books are I've 4 or 5 of my books are in Brazil, and I did this fabulous tour in Brazil, going to schools all through Sao Paulo, and it was remarkable. Meeting kids. I had a translator with me, so we were sort of doing this simultaneous. I would say a sentence, she would say a sentence, and then I signed books and had these wonderful kids that I met along the way. It was just fantastic.
It's amazing that you're impacting so many lives all over the world. It's, I commend you for what you're doing. It's not an easy subject matter.
When I wrote The Secret of Gabi's Dresser, I did it as a personal journey to record my mother's story at the time,
Hmm.
and was thrilled, grateful that a publisher in Canada was willing to take it on. I never imagined that I would become a writer of Holocaust literature for young people.
Well, yeah, you didn't start off as a writer, which I also thought was fascinating. Who
I
is
did
this
not.
woman? Okay.
I did not. Always wanted to write. Always, I had that story in me. I knew that I wanted to write that story, and really, wanted to write it for my kids more than anything else. So they would have this kind of record of their grandmother, who they never knew. My mother died when I was a teenager, so my children never knew her. So I wanted to have that record for them. But to now sort of define myself as a writer of Holocaust literature for mostly young readers is more astounding to me than anyone else, in all honesty. And I always say, every time I've written the last book that I think I'm going to write about this time in history, another incredible story comes to me. So I think, well, I've got to write that one. And then, and then I've got to write that one. And then, okay, that one I'm going to write. And then it, and so it goes.
It's the creative in you. It's,
This has been I worked as a psychologist for many years, working with troubled teens and their families, and loved that work. I really did love that work. But this transition into writing and speaking and has just been the most joyful transition for me. I don't even have the words to talk about just how wonderful this transition has been.
well, I appreciate even how you discuss it, right? Because again, not easy subject matter, but you have a very good approach to it. You seem very grounded when responding, and you see both perspectives, and I think that's really important too.
When you talk to kids and you get all those wonderful questions that kids ask, you really do have to figure out how to respond to something, how to be somewhat neutral, but also make sure that my point is being heard. Make sure that they're getting the truth of what it is that I'm trying to talk about. So yeah, kids have taught me a lot about how to talk about this history.
For sure. Well, I'm thinking even something like the Nuremberg trials, where if for a kid, let's say they make a mistake and they do something wrong and they get a second chance. Like, how do you explain, well, this was a big wrong. Do they deserve a second chance? Like that discussion. I would love to just be a fly on the wall in your teaching of children.
Yeah, it's a wonderful time with kids. I'm always amazed at the thoughtful and sensitive questions that kids have about my life personally, my mother's life, my father's life. The curiosity that they have, and then, oh my gosh, like the ridiculousness of some of their questions. For some reason, young kids always want to know if I have a dog. I don't know why that is really, it's probably coming from a kid who has a dog, and it's their way of making a connection with me. But, I get I've had every question asked of me imaginable. And on those occasions when someone will ask something that I've not been asked before, I've been speaking to kids now for over 20 years. It's really astonishing to me that someone has come up with a question that I've not been asked before. So I revel in that.
That's like keep you on your toes. I plant them in the audience just to keep you sharp. So
Great.
It's really, I'm just in awe of you. And I also, even just as an artist, and this is part of what I was you had your say, you were working with troubled teens and you go, I'm going to write. And I think there are so many artists out there that have stories in them that they want to share, and they're scared to take that step. They're scared, like, oh, my story is not good enough. It's not worthy of being heard, whatnot. So for you to even write something and get it published and just get that first story out there, I think is so, so impressive.
And let's be honest, it wasn't easy. I mean, that first manuscript that I sent out, I mean, I could wallpaper a room in my house with the rejection letters that I received. Oh. As do most writers. It starts with rejection. As do most actors. It starts with rejection.
No, it's easy peasy the whole way. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. So when I had one publisher who was interested, not even willing at the time to publish. I mean, she still made me go through hoops before she got to the point where she said, "Yes, we're going to take it on." And even then, it took another, 2 years until the book came out. So it was a arduous process, worth it, every step of the way worth it. And then with, one under my belt, it was so much easier to do the second one and then the third one and so on. And I will give a shout out to Second Story Press, who has published 15 of my 30 books. They are my primary publisher. I love my other publishers, and I'm published by some wonderful Penguin Canada and Orca Books and Annick Press and HarperCollins. I'm published by some other wonderful publishers, but Margie Wolf and Second Story Press, and her commitment, the publisher there, her commitment to publishing Holocaust literature for young readers is really admirable. So I really owe so much to her.
I love that. I feel like I'd like to thank the Academy. I would be terrible at those speeches. I would forget everyone who to thank. And then I'm sorry, everyone. I appreciate all of you.
I hope you have a chance one day to stand up on stage and give that
and give my awkwardly, I'm going to forget every single person's name. Thank you for this. Peace out. And political, with the peace. Okay.
Right.
Because I always want to spout words of wisdom, if I ever receive some form of accolade, and I go, yes, I want to leave words of wisdom for the future generation, right? I know when I see an artist go up there and they leave, I'm like, oh, this inspired me, and this is so hopeful. So yeah, I'm gonna be working on my speech now. That's the only thing I've taken away from this chat. So it's but I also love, like, again, you're a writer, and then your kids are in the arts as well. Also, if people can see, anyone that's watching this visually, is that like Gabi and Jake's first headshots behind you? Because that makes me smile so much. I know it can't be first. They were way young. They had to be younger.
Yeah, it's not first, but it's just kind of two of my favorite headshots that I have up there on the wall.
Well, they're also like kind of looking at each other, like he's angled this way, she's angled this way. I love it.
I'm always grateful. My kids, and blessed, my kids are good friends of one another. So yes, they can look at each other in these photographs and support and champion one another's strengths and accomplishments. So it's always a good thing.
It is. And like, again, what I said, like, they're keeping stories alive. And it's really important and necessary. I really do. I appreciate everything that you do. I do want to give a plug for next Saturday, Saturday, December 17th from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Miles Nadell JCC, 750 Spadina Avenue, second floor. Ooh, have I been on the second floor? I don't know, but you're doing a book launch and it is Hidden on the Wire. I'm just going to read from here because I don't want to make it bad. I shouldn't have said I was reading, just put it in my eyeline. Anyways, Hidden on the High Wire tells the story of a Jewish circus performer who was hidden in plain sight in a circus during the Second World War and the Holocaust. This young woman's bravery was extraordinary, as was the courage of those who protected her. When I read the synopsis, I need to know how you came up with this one. Or is this okay?
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, as you can imagine, because I write about this history, I am just constantly researching this history. And I go down these rabbit holes when I get the inkling of a story that just perks my radar, sparks my attention. So I can't even remember for sure, but I think I read a line about a Jewish circus performer. And I immediately kind of went, Jewish circus performer? How could that be? Those two concepts, Jewish and circus performer, just don't seem to go together. And sure enough, I mean, what I discovered is that not only was she a Jewish circus performer, but she came from a circus dynasty, Jewish family circus dynasty that went back to the 1800s. Her great grandparents who were circus performers and passed the circus on and on and on. And, that story just spoke to me. And again, the fact that there was someone, actually the owner of another circus, who was willing to take her in at that dangerous time, willing to harbor her in this circus. She continued to perform throughout the war under an assumed name in this second circus. That circus was searched by the Gestapo numerous times. Most of the circus performers in that circus knew that she was Jewish, and they kept her secret safe. So her story and the story of the man who saved and harbored her, he and his wife, was just another remarkable story that I knew I had to write. So, that became Hidden on the High Wire, also published by Second Story Press, my wonderful publisher. And I'm so happy we're launching it on Saturday.
After Shabbos, of course, the best time. Okay. Well, because the Jews are going to buy it. So now you're targeting, like you said, trying to get other people. I think it was very clever.
Correct. We got lots of people out there buying it.
Yeah. It's good. So you sign it. We get a picture with the author. How does it work?
You bet. There'll be a talk. I'm actually launching this with another woman who is launching her new book. Her name is Sarah Schwartz. So she has this wonderful new book that's just come out called, well, you probably have it there in front of you. It's got a wonderful title, Heroines. I want to get it right.
That's fair. I did have it and then I lost it. This is no, that's okay. That's okay. I'm going to get it.
Okay. Because her book is also fantastic. It's Heroines, Something, Spies, and Rabbis. These are stories, like 10 stories of incredible...
Oh, heroines, rescuers, rabbis, spies. Unsung women of the Holocaust. Oh, yes.
Fantastic book. And Sarah, this is her first book for a young adult audience. But Sarah has been my editor on about 10 of the books that I've written. So she is an established and wonderful editor and is now transitioning to writing. She's written adult stuff. This is the first foray into YA literature. So the fact that I'm standing on stage next to the woman who edited a bunch of my books and is now celebrating her first book is also just incredibly important to me and to us.
That's amazing. It's just, and again, like just you you being there and like giving other, I feel like someone gave you an opportunity and now you're giving other people opportunities. And I really do love that. Even it's just like a basic as an artist. I say writers or artists. I feel like that's correct terminology. Okay. You
Yep.
don't want to identify as an artist. You're only a writer. I don't know. Okay.
We're in the same category. It's the arts. This is all
Yeah,
the arts.
it is. It's very artsy, but also research based.
Yes.
So, there's a little sciencey component.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love the research. I mean, well, as you can imagine, as I said, I'm constantly looking for stories within this history that I know or I believe will appeal to my audience, the people I write for.
I think with the research too, what I found when I was like, or if I would do a play from the Holocaust and I would research that character, I think what's so interesting is the parts that aren't known. And then you try and piece them together and you can't always get it right. But the parts that you manage to find and piece together, you go, oh, wow, that's unexpected and surprising. And I think even, just again, that lack of information. And I guess people kind of recorded things, but not as much as we do nowadays with technology. So it's a lot of research for that time to figure out what story you're going to, because we record things that people didn't post on the gram. So what can you do? Okay.
And I'm continually learning. I mean, so a story like this one about a Jewish circus performer,
I know I read that and I go, I need to understand this. Okay.
Yeah, I'm continually learning about this history as well and being surprised by the stories that I read.
And even the people that I think, and I don't know if you heard this too, lately, people are finding out that they were Jewish. And then and I think that's so interesting too, that to know that to see someone do a ritual like lighting candles, but don't know why, or so you keep a little bit of Judaism in you, or to kind of just discover that people hid their identity, which again, understand survival, and
Right.
to learn now that you are Jewish. Like there's so many stories. And again, that's part of why I love what you're doing. And I love if people would just kind of, because not everyone wants to share, but like learn a little bit about history and you never know, be like, oh, I didn't know this was Judaism. Am I Jewish? Cool. Interesting. That's how it works. It's that easy. So
Yep, that's how it works.
that is why I am not a teacher or a writer. Maybe I am, depends on the day. Is there any final thoughts that you have for anyone watching that we haven't covered? Because I know that's like such an open-ended question, and I actually hate myself for asking it for this particular chat because we didn't cover a lot, but we covered a tad.
Yeah, no, we did. We sort of touched on a whole bunch of things that I hope will give your audience something to think about, and maybe they'll have a chance to read one of my books or somebody else's books on this history and learn something from it and be inspired to read some more or do something to, affirm the positive side of human nature. So that would be a wonderful thing.
This is how I know you're a pro. You were ready. You had your final thoughts. You were good to go. That was, I like that. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me. If everyone is going to come to the book launch because it's going to be great. And there's a circus performer story, which is fascinating. Saturday, December 17th, 3 to 5 p.m. Miles Nadell, JCC, second floor. Be there. See Kathy. She's lovely. Okay.
Thank you, Robyn. You're lovely as well. I really, really enjoyed the time with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to do like a weird wave. It's just a wave, but I say it's weird. I don't know why. Okay. Bye. Thank you all for watching. Thank you to future viewers for watching. And thank you again to Kathy.